Hi, my name's Rebecca, this is the CreaBea Knitting Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about Raglan sweaters. Hello, my name is Rebecca, I'm a knitter based in Edinburgh in Scotland, and this is a channel where I talk about knitting. And today I'm going to be talking about 10 Raglan sweater patterns. The good, the bad and the ugly? No, mostly just good. Lots of sweaters that I've knit, sweaters that have been recommended to me, and a little bit about my favourite type of sweater construction, which is the Raglan sweater. This is so good for so many reasons. It is a really easy garment to fit. It is a really good beginner's sweater because there are generally not too many tricky techniques. And I am a big fan of like the endless sea of stockinette in the round, and this is exactly what many top-down Raglan sweaters are. So today I'm going to talk about the three and a half different top-down Raglan sweaters that I've tried. I've also had some recommendations on Instagram from other people's favourites, and so we're going to have a look at those, talk about what might be different about them, what might be, like why you might pick that pattern over another pattern. And then at the end I've got a little bonus about Raglan sweaters. So before I jump into my collection, I'm actually not going to go through all of them, but I've got at least one of every one of the patterns that I've knit. Before I jump into those, what is a Raglan sweater? So a Raglan sweater is a sweater which has 4 points of increase or decrease that go from the neckline down to the armpit. Now you can also knit Raglans bottom up. My preferred way is to knit them top down. And so in a top down Raglan, what will generally happen is you will usually cast on for your collar, and then after you finish your collar, you'll place markers around your knitting that will be your points of increase. You usually then work short rows. My preferred short rows are German short rows, but there are lots of different types of short rows, and you're going to work them back and forward. And the purpose of that is to increase the back neckline to make it sit higher on your neck than your front neck so it doesn't choke you. And then you're going to knit the whole yoke, increasing at all of the 4 points that you have marked on your sweater. Now, there are so many types of increases. You can use make ones, you can use lifted increases, sometimes there are decorative increases. But the purpose there is ultimately that each of these points that you're working down, you're increasing usually 8 stitches every second round. And then at the end of that, what you do is you split for sleeves. So you're going to put the sleeve stitches usually on hold, cast on for the body, knit the ribbing, pick up for your sleeves, pick up a few extra stitches under the arm, and knit your sleeves as per. And so there's a lot of knitting in the round, not a lot of purling, and it's really easy to get a really good fit with a Raglan. There are only a few points that are important to measure. Like the fitting points for a Raglan are usually pretty straightforward. You want your neck to fit the way you like it. So if you like an open neck or you like a more fitted neck, like that's an important part that you can modify. You then want to make sure that the yoke depth, so the distance between your neck and the underarm, you want to make sure that that fits. And then the other two are making sure that there are enough stitches to give you the amount of ease you want over the chest, and then enough stitches that you've got the ease you want over the arm. So really with a Raglan, like there are only 4 things that are important, like bust measurement, bust or chest measurement, bicep measurement, yoke depth, and then the way you want your neck to fit. And that is the Raglan 101. I adore knitting Raglans. I find them so meditative, and I especially love that the only bit that I find a bit tricky in a Raglan is the short rows, and they're right at the start. So you still got all that enthusiasm. I mean, when I knit them top down, they're usually at the start, and so you knit them really quickly, and then from there on it's just knit with no cares in the world. So it's a very simple construction, but there are so many basic Raglan sweaters out there that it's kind of like, well, what's the point in having, like, why? If there are so many different ones, what can change, what can be different? And so I kind of want to talk about that today. So for each of the sweaters, why would you knit that one? What are some differentiators about that pattern? And what other people thought about it? And why might you think about that one? I will say that myself alone, I have 4 different patterns for a plain top-down raglan. So clearly there's a market for it. So designers keep publishing basic, like classic, basic, I don't know, the same word really with different connotations. They keep publishing these patterns, and the reason is they're great to knit, they fit well, and in my opinion, they go really well in my wardrobe. So I can understand why they keep getting produced. So I've got 3 patterns to show you that I'll start off with, and then we'll jump into the ones that have been recommended by others. And it feels like it's only right to start at the very beginning, which was basically one of my very first, it can't be one of the first things I knit. It definitely wasn't, but it feels to me, I pretty much finished this just before I started filming the podcast, so it feels to me like it has been one of my first knits, and that is the No Frills sweater. So this is my No Frills. You can see it's got a bit of narrow ribbing there, and then it uses a make one increase all the way down the sleeve to fit the arms. Mine is a little bit cropped, and I knit this one in woolly knit British wool in the colour Skiddaw Nip, held double. Now let me try this on and we can have a chat about it. Okay, so here is my first No Frills. Now you can see that their back neck, if you can see this very well, but the back neck is higher than the front neck, and that's been done with short row shaping. It's quite an oversized and quite a loose fit. Like I said, it's using a make one increase down here. And again, my sleeves and my arm, the body are a little bit cropped. That's not the pattern, that was just me being a little bit lazy. Now, I have not touched this sweater in ages. I barely ever wear it, and I don't know why. I pulled it out today and I was like, oh, I love this sweater. I've not touched it in so long. But let me talk about the No Frills in general. So what I like about the No Frills is a very simple and easy to follow pattern. It is a gauge I really enjoy. It is 21 stitches per 10 centimeters, which for me is a DK weight gauge, which is generally like fingering weight held double, which is what this is, or fingering weight in mohair, which I really enjoy. And that's like a gauge that I can get on like 4mm needles, and I'm really comfortable knitting at that gauge. The things I do not like about this sweater are, let's see. Okay, the very first thing I don't like about it is that it's not a very size inclusive pattern. So Petite Knit has improved in recent years and made more inclusive patterns. However, some of her older designs have not been graded to a fully size range, and especially this one is a very classic design, so there's no reason, like raglans can fit lots of sizes, so there's no reason why it's not been extended. But that's obviously a big down point to this pattern. I will add, she has another one which is 21 stitch gauge and which does go up to a full size range, and that is the Monday sweater. The only difference I can tell otherwise is it's got a folded neckband, and it's got like a 2-stitch raglan, so there are 2 stitches here instead of just 1. But if you like Petite Knit style and you would like to knit one of the raglans, the Monday sweater came highly recommended, and also is a more size inclusive size range. The other thing which I do not like about it is it's got quite a wide neck. Now I'm just wearing like a strappy camisole underneath, and so it works fine, but if I wear a t-shirt, my t-shirt comes right to here, and you can always see my t-shirt peeking through from underneath my sweater, and I just don't like it. Like, it just bothers me. And this is also like a relatively boxy fit, so it's not a very fitted raglan. You see I get folds here where there's quite a lot of fabric. Nothing wrong with that, that's a style choice. But it is not a particularly fitted raglan. I've got another version of this one, so let me pop the second version on and we can talk about the same. So this is my second version. It is knit also in woolly knit. This is the navy, oh, it's definitely a bit bubbly. Oh, I don't think it is. I think it's actually just picked up dust. This is the merino wool in the colourway navy. I've talked about this before, but every time I talk about woolly knit I get questions. What's this one? The British wool is a kind of variegated. Their merino wool is matte. It's like a hard colour. This to me is most definitely next to skin soft. It is not as soft as like superwash merino. But there's like, I've got 0 itch right now, absolutely none. I do have a bit of a prickle with the British wool, like around my neck, but this one has no prickle at all. I knit this one not long after I finished the first one, and my learning from this is that I went down a size. So Petite knit in all of her patterns recommends a lot of positive ease. I think it looks very like Scandi chic on Petite knit because she is petite. I am not petite, and so I think if I was to get the size I was looking for, I would be knitting quite a bigger size, and I just don't like, I like oversized sometimes, but she usually recommends like 20 plus centimeters of ease, and I didn't want that. So from the first one to this one, I sized down. I don't know if you can tell quite as much, but there's not quite as much fabric. I wear this one a lot. I have a blue dress that I love. It's a wrap dress that I've sewn, and it's perfect for summer, but it's not really for any other time of year. So what I love to wear is wear that and then layer it with this on top, and it's perfect. And I really like it. The sleeves are also a little bit cropped, but that was my own personal decision. And the sleeves are also relatively fitted. So that is my no frills sweater. I'm pretty sure that my future, I've made quite a few no frills. I think I've made 4 in total. These two, I made one in a grey, which like shrunk in the wash, but I now quite like the fit of it, even though it shrunk. And I made one completely off gauge, but I followed the instructions of the pattern in a white. And I do wear them, but for me it's really important to knit size inclusive patterns. And I've also found another sweater, Raglan sweater, that I really like. And so my future Raglans are not going to be no frills. I'm going to be opting for something different in the future if I want to knit something at this gauge. So talking about gauge leads me pretty comfortably into the next sweater, and the next sweater I'm going to talk about is my very first Lento. The Lento is a pattern by, I can't remember her name, Jonna something. She's the founder of Lina magazine, and this is published in Lina magazine. And it is, I will hold mine up, I have made some modifications. So this is the Lento. Some things to note are that the raglan is a little bit different. So you will see that the raglan looks like it has 2 stitches almost. It actually doesn't, but the way that the stitch increase is done, it is done with a knit front and back increase instead of a make one increase. And so here, it's a bit hard to see, but there's a very clear like singular stitch. Here it looks more like the increases are coming out from 2 stitches. This pattern also has a folded over neckline, which I have not done. I'm currently working on my 3rd version of this pattern, and I've not done this with any of them. Mostly out of laziness, if I'm being perfectly honest. Maybe on my next version I will try a folded over neckline. The magic of this sweater ultimately in the Lento is the gauge. This is also knit with a strand of fingering and a strand of mohair, which could make a 21 stitch gauge. But in this pattern it is a much looser and airier gauge, meaning 2 things. It becomes a very, very lightweight sweater, and you don't use very much yarn. They're technically the same thing, because the reason it's lightweight is because there's not much yarn. It also means it's a very quick knit. I've talked a lot about the Lento in the past few months, so I'm not going to go too crazy much into it. But I really like this sweater. It's a little bit oversized, I'll put it on in a second. Not quite as oversized as the Petite knit one is. I will say, what I love about this is it's a really good way to use up, or not to use up, but like to use what would otherwise be quite expensive yarns, like a hand-dyed yarn, without it becoming too crazy expensive. Because for my size, I can get a sweater out of 2 skeins of hand-dyed fingering weight yarn, and then a commercial mohair, which means you get like a hand-dyed sweater for what, like £50, 50 something pounds, which still sounds like a lot of money, but if you were going to otherwise make a sweater in hand-dyed yarn, it would potentially be much more than that. So I think it's a really good way to use up special skeins, or to make a fancy hand-dyed sweater on a budget. The one thing I will say is my sweater is not that warm. So I've not been wearing my Lento that much over winter, and that is because the area, you can see, it's not see-through. It's not a see-through gauge, but it is, the stitches are much bigger. I actually could hold up my 21 stitch gauge version. And you can see that technically these yarns, like I could have used the same yarn to knit either, but the stitches on here are much smaller than the stitches on here. And it just means it doesn't keep in as much warmth because there's more space between the stitches, which is just science. So I find this is a really, really good transitional piece when I, like in the spring and in the summer, but I don't find it to be my warmest sweater to wear in the winter. 2 more comments. Actually, let me put it on first. So here we go. The neckline is still a little bit wide, but not as wide as my no frills. This is knit up in Telling Yarns hand dyed something from a while ago. I know what it is. It is, oh, I forgot what they're called. I know what it is. It's Gullet Farm Romney, I believe. It's Gullet Farm, and it was hand dyed by Telling Yarns, but it's the Gullet Farm base. And I had 2 skeins of this, and it was a very special, like I was so excited by this colour and this sweater that having 2 skeins. That's why I found Lento, because I was like, I need to knit something. Like, I keep being rudely interrupted by the door going. But I think I was saying that this was really special yarn. I wanted to use up every ounce of it, and I wanted to wear it, but I didn't want to make something like a Love Note or Ranunculus, which are like lacy, because I don't wear them so often. And so this is what I made, and I loved it. I have made, yeah, 1 more since, and I've got another one on my needles. My 2 comments were going to be, the first one is a size inclusive pattern, which we like. I can't remember the full size range, but I know that it is like a 5XL, and it goes all the way up to, I believe, 160cm bust, which is great. There are, however, possibly some errors in the pattern. Now, I've never had an issue with it, but I think that becomes from me having confidence with knitting top-down raglan sweaters, that once I've been told how many stitches to have for each section, and I know how the short rows have been done, and I know what the raglan increases are, I just go. Like, I just knit. And I try on the raglan as I go. That's another great thing about top-down raglan, is that before you split for sleeves, you can try it on, make sure it fits, make sure you've got enough space, and that is something which I always just do. So I think that there are some numerical issues in the pattern. It's never held me back, but I've had that message a couple of times in the past when I've talked about the sweater. So those are my first 2. My next one, however, is my all-time favourite top-down sweater. No, yeah, it's my all-time favourite raglan for sure, and this will be the raglan that I'm making next. However, I am almost embarrassed because this sweater is in such a bad state, and the reason it's in such a bad state is because I wear this sweater like twice a week, and I've worn it twice a week every single week, some weeks even more than that, since I finished it. And I think I finished it before Christmas. More than that, like I think I finished it more than 6 months ago. So I will say, I think it's showing more wear than I would hope for this type, like after just 6 months, but that is not a reflection on the pattern, that is 100% a reflection on the yarn. I used Drops Flora and Drops Kid Silk Mohair. And this, my third and final top-down sweater, is the Semper sweater. Oh, also it's in black, so that also doesn't make any life any easier. This is a Semper sweater by the Knit Purl Girl, and it's really, really good. So the major thing that I like most about this pattern is it's a really great fit. It is not oversized, but it has quite a nice amount of ease, so I feel very comfortable in it. It has like quite a nice, neat sleeve, like it feels like quite a fitted sleeve, but it's not too fitted. The yoke depth for me is perfect, and the thing which I love the very most about it is the way it fits around my neck. So let me put it on and I will show you. So here we go, talking about my favourite sweater, and of course it's in the colour, which is hardest to see, but you can see it's the closest around my neckline. Just checking if I'm on the right way, I do. It's the closest around my neckline. It is a folded collar, and I think the pattern suggests that you can add elastic. I have never added elastic to mine, and it stayed in place pretty well, which is completely fine. It's got such a nice fit over the shoulders, and like you can see, like there's some extra, like it's got a bit of extra space, but it doesn't feel oversized. All my sweaters seem to end up bracelet length. I think with this one, I know the reason. It's because it's felted quite a lot in like the like right in the underarm and then like down here, and so that felting has shrunk my sleeves. I still wear it every second day. I think a major reason I wear this is because it's a black sweater, and I think I needed a black sweater in my wardrobe. But like I said, I really, really love this pattern. This pattern is a size inclusive pattern. Sophie also writes very clear, very informative patterns. So for me, I don't need that much information. I prefer a pattern that has less information in it. However, I'm also willing, like, I'd rather there was too much information than too little information. And so I find that I can still get the information I need from the pattern, even if like I have to skim through some of it. I also think this pattern would be really good for like a first sweater, and I think that was potentially Sophie's intention. I know it's priced, it's quite an inexpensive pattern. I think it's maybe only £5 or £6. And the reason for that was that she was like, it's a basic, it's a classic, I want to just make this as easy as possible. And so I think it'd be a really good first sweater. This one, and I believe, I honestly not talked about this, I think the Lento might be too. This is a compound raglan, and a compound raglan is a very fancy term for when you only increase on one part of the body. So currently, a very basic raglan, you increase every second round at the raglan markers. Now for some sizes, you might find, or for your body, you might find that to get a size in your chest, you might not want that much fabric on your arms, or vice versa. Maybe you don't have much of a chest, you're not very busty, or you've got big biceps and you want more space in your arms than you do for your chest for that size. And what you can do is only increase in some of the sections. So you might only increase on the size of the markers for your arms, or you might only increase for the size for your bust. And that's what we say, that's what a compound raglan is. And this pattern is a compound raglan. So you knit a certain number of rows, increasing the body and the sleeves, and then you continue only on the body. And I think that is why you've got a more tapered sleeve fit. This will be the next sweater that I cast on. Not the next, will it be the next sweater I cast on? Maybe. I've promised myself to I've currently got a few sweaters on the needles, and so I have a green one which is not a raglan. Once that is off my needles, I will be allowing myself to cast on another plain sweater, and that is going to be another Semper sweater in cobalt blue. I'm so excited. But yeah, this would be from my personal experience, this is my #1 recommendation for a top-down raglan sweater, the Semper sweater by Sophie of the Knit Purl Girl. She also has a V-neck version, which I have not knit. I think they're both called Semper, so like the Semper sweater and the Semper V-neck. I have a good degree of confidence in saying that the fit of the V-neck will be the same as the fit for the round neck, and the instructions will be different. At some point in future I might knit it. I feel like I don't get on very well with V-necks. They just don't seem to hit me where I want them to hit. So not big on V-necks, but if I do decide to knit a V-neck, I think that will be the one that I knit. She also has a what's it called? Yeah, a vest. Called a vest? A slipover? She's got I think it's called a slip. I don't know if it's a slipover or not. Anyway, she's also got one which is a slipover. And now I'm talking about it, I'm thinking, although I don't think that's a raglan. Oh, I'm just talking nonsense now. This is why I should look at things before I open them up. She also has a Semper V-neck, and she has a Semper slipover, although I'm not sure if the Semper slipovers are raglan shaping. I would expect they are not. Cool. So those are the 3 that I've knitted, and of the 3 that I've knitted, my favourite is the Semper sweater. I do also enjoy, this is also I think a 21 stitch gauge, so very similar to the No Frills. This to me is like the better version of the No Frills. Fits better around my neck, fits better overall, is size inclusive. 10 out of 10. I will continue with the Lento. I have made 2 this year. Well, 1, and I'm halfway through a sleeve of the other one, so like 1 3/4 or 1 2/3 maybe. So I'm not sure, I think I'll cast on a Lento at some point in the future. I love the idea of a really soft grey version, but I've not got it on my needles right now, and I don't know when that will happen. So those are the ones which I have made. Now let's move on to a couple of recommendations. Now I've got my iPad open here so that I can get my answers right, and I want to be able to look up things like the gauges and show you some pictures. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is the Cosy Classic Raglan by Jessie Maed. And this is also a DK weight garment, so it also recommends a fingering weight held with a DK weight. So similar to the No Frills and the Semper. However, the gauge is actually a little bit looser. It's 18 stitches per 10 centimeters, meaning it's going to be a slightly more open fabric, and it kind of sits a little bit between the Semper and the Lento. It's going to knit pretty quickly for a DK weight garment, and it's also going to be kind of like a relatively airy and drapey fabric. This is really size inclusive. It goes from a 28 to 62 inch, no, yeah, 21 to 62 inch finished bust. And it's relatively fitted, so it's more similar, I think, to the Semper sweater. There's not as much ease recommended. And I have not knit this sweater, but I think this is a favourite of many. It's a great basic. I think the gauge is pretty special. What's also really good is, having knit other Jessie Maed designs, is it's got a really good, it's got very good instruction. So there are lots of options, there are lots of breakdowns. I'm pretty sure there's a chart where the original pattern was knit in a relatively expensive hand dyed, like the original sample. And there's a chart with lots of different suggestions for other yarns to use. So if you're a bit more nervous about yarn substitution, that would be a really good way of doing it. It also just has loads of projects on Ravelry, which I always, yeah, it's got, I mean, I think everything I've talked about so far has been very popular, but it has got 1,791 projects on Ravelry, which is a good way of going on, seeing what other people used, seeing how it fits on different body types, if they have pictures, and that's something that I always appreciate. The other thing about this pattern is it comes in a light version, and so that is the fingering weight version, and that I currently have on my needles. Not too much to say about it because I haven't made very much progress. It's not finished, I've not worn it, I can't tell you too much about it. But this is the Cosy Classic Light that's been in a very small bag. And what I will say is that when it came to, I knew I wanted to make a fingering weight raglan in this yarn, and when I came to looking for a fingering weight raglan, this is the pattern that I went for because there were lots of options and I had never done a Jessie Maed pattern and I wanted to try one, and so this is what I picked. I will say that I found the neckline to be a little bit too wide, and so I started, again, not right next to my neck but quite far out, and I looked through a lot of the pattern pictures and the projects and I found that a lot of them looked quite wide. So what I decided to do is I cast on fewer stitches for the ribbing, and immediately after the ribbing I increased evenly. So say that, I'm making these numbers up, but say that the pattern told me to cast on 110 stitches. I cast on 100 stitches, did my ribbing, and then did one round where every 10 stitches I increased 1 stitch. And so at the end of that round I had 110. Then I placed my raglan markers and then I continued going from there, which meant that my neckline was much more cinched in than the pattern suggests. And that was my way of getting around that. And I felt pretty comfortable doing it. I can't tell you if it's worked yet because I've not finished this sweater. But that is a good thing to consider if you're making a raglan sweater and there are things that you don't like the neckline. You can also change that yourself. Okay, moving swiftly on, or I'm going to take so long to get through these. The next one I'm excited about, and this is the White Mountains, and this is a pattern by Midori Hirose, or Midori Hirose. And I think this is an amazing sweater. I've not made it, but I intend to. And I think this is a lot because I said already, I have 4 different patterns for top-down raglan sweaters, and this is a new one that I'm like, yep, I would buy that pattern. So it shows you that even when you think like, even a very overdone sweater construction can still have something new and different. So I'll put some pictures in. This has got a couple of really interesting things about it. So the first thing is it's a worsted weight pattern. They've just used, I believe, like a single, maybe not, maybe they've used strands held together. I think they've used a fingering held with alpaca. But the gauge is 17 stitches per 10 centimeters, sorry, 14 stitches per 10 centimeters on a 7mm needle. So that is pretty similar. Actually, if anything, it's a little bit bigger gauge than the Lento, although they've used thicker fabric. So whilst the Lento is it's using very thin fabric to get a very loose gauge, this is using a thicker fabric to get a thicker gauge, and so it shouldn't be it should be cold, for example. This is incredibly size inclusive. It goes from a 2XS all the way up to a 6XL. Now the numbers itself aren't enough just to say it's size inclusive, but what I can tell you is it goes from a 44 to a 72 inch bust, and it recommends around about 12 inches of positive ease. So it is more of the oversized, but I think it works really, really well. There are 2 things I love about this. The first is that it has a number of neckline options. I'm hoping that editing me is putting pictures in so you can see what I'm talking about. It has a couple of neckline options. The first is quite an open neck, which I think, looking at it, would make the same problem for me that others do, which is that it's quite open and I can literally see the t-shirt of one of the models in the picture, which bothers me. The second option is like a funnel neck, and I think this is the one that I would make. It just continues the rib up and I think it looks so chic, it's so stunning. And then the third has like a kinda, I don't know if I'm gonna say what it's called. Oh, apparently there are 4 variations. I don't know what the fourth one is, but there's one which's got a very wide, is it gonna tell me what the 4 variations are? No. There's a fourth. There's one that's got just a stockinette stitched sort of big tube. I'll put some pictures in and you'll see what that one looks like, and I think it looks really interesting. It's not my cup of tea, but that is something that I don't see in many other patterns, and so I think this would fit the bill for a lot of people. The other thing I love about this is where the raglan starts. So on this raglan, this is a very classic, I can't even find my raglan, it's here. It goes from here and it goes down to the armpit, from like, that's basically my collarbone, and they all start equidistant apart. With the White Mountains, it starts almost exactly here. So the raglan, instead of going here in a straight line, it curves and it goes like this, like an S shape almost. And I think that's a really interesting detail. I also know that this pattern was released in a light version like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So if you're not a worsted knitwear wearer, this might be a good option. And yeah, I will definitely make this. I'm just looking at this now thinking I should cast it on already because it just looks so good. Maybe my cobalt blue sweater should be in this instead. Interesting. I like it a lot. And I've knit the ranunculus, which is another Midori Hirose pattern. Had a great time with it, so I would feel pretty confident knitting more of that design. So next up we have a very popular sweater with a big caveat. So the next one is the Felix sweater. The Felix is both a cardigan and a sweater by Aimee Christoffers, who I think is Savoury knitting? Christoffers, I'm never sure which one it is. In my head it's Christoffers, but I don't know why. Maybe that's just the first time I heard it, that's how I heard it, and now that's what I think. So that's the Felix. Now the Felix is really popular, and the reason is because it's got a decorative raglan stitch in it. It's done using eyelets, so I'm just pulling it up now. Yes, it's Savoury knitting. So it is, again, quite a loose gauge. It is a 14 stitch gauge with Aran weight yarn. So similar to the Lento, again, it's suggesting a slightly thicker yarn. So it won't be quite as airy and drapey as the Lento. But again, it should knit up pretty quickly. And like I said, the magic in this is that the increases that are done down the raglan are done with eyelets. So an eyelet is done by doing a yarn over, and if you can use that to increase your stitch count. So often you make a yarn over and then you knit it together next to each other in lace, and that means you don't change your stitch count. In this pattern, instead of doing a regular raglan increase, the yarn overs are used to increase the stitch count. And I think that's very interesting. I think it's really cool. It's very delicate and quite feminine looking. There is also a cardigan version. So this is the sweater where there is a cardigan. The big thing that's kind of annoying is the sizing isn't great. There are only 5 sizes, and it goes from a 39-inch bust to a 57-inch bust, and it recommends 7 inches of positive ease, which means it only goes up to a 50-inch bust, and that's not particularly inclusive. We're cutting out a lot of knitters with that size range, and it's a shame because it's a very popular pattern. 4,500 projects on Ravelry. It would be great if we could see it in more sizes. But it's a very popular yarn, very popular pattern. I have not knit this, and I have decided for myself to only knit from size inclusive designs, and so I won't be knitting this one. But it is very popular, and I can see why. It's basic, but it's got a little bit of sparkle, a bit of pizzazz. Okay, the next one I've also not knit, and I felt like I heard about this a while ago, and I've not heard about it for a while anymore, but it is still a very popular pattern, and it is the Autumn League Pullover by Alexandre Tavel, who is TwoOfWands. Now, I have heard of TwoOfWands a few times. She's got a really good blog, and I think a lot of the pattern She has some patterns. She's got a really good Raglan wrap cardigan, which is a free pattern available straight from her website. And actually I see that the Autumn League pullover also has a free version on her blog. You can obviously purchase a sweater on Ravelry, but if you are unable to or don't want to, you can go straight to the blog and get a free version. Mohair is really itching my nose. So this is a much more inclusive design. It goes from a 36-inch bust to a 64-inch bust, which is pretty good, and it recommends 4 to 6 inches of ease. So we're pretty much going up to a 60-inch bust there, which is pretty bang on for size inclusivity. That's what we like to hear. What's cool about this one is it's got some like sporty details that make it more of a sweatshirt than a knitted sweater. The two of those are a split hem and this, I don't know what you call it, like there's a cross here at the neck that you often see in like sports sweatshirts, and for some reason the two things are different lengths, and I think that's normal in a sweatshirt, but I just don't like it. I don't know why. And yeah, she looks super cozy and cool in it. It is a 19 stitch gauge, which is DK weight yarn, so again similar to the ones we've seen already, like the No Frills, the Semper. That's the same kind of yarn you would use. And I think that's all I want to say about this one. I'm not desperate to knit it, but I know a lot of people have. It's incredibly popular. Yeah, 1,266 projects on Ravelry, so lots of inspiration to find there. And yeah, it's something a bit different. That sporty look is something which I don't see very often. And I also think what would be interesting is that's a sort of technique that it's a free pattern. You could have a look, understand how it's done, and you could plug some of those techniques into a pattern that you already have and you really like. So if you already have the Semper sweater but you want to make it more sweatshirty, you could have a look at how they make that cross, or you could look at the instructions for a split hem, which is something that I really like. Cool. Okay, the next one is a popular one, and this is a popular one for a very good reason, and that is the Flax sweater by Tinka Knits. Now this is a free pattern, and this is an, I don't know how to call it, like a for all the family sweater, is that the way to put it? And what's great about this, yeah, exactly, it goes from 0 months to 6XL. It's worsted weight, it's 18 stitches, and it's a free pattern. Now the Flax does have a garter stitch detail down the sleeve. You could just take that out, so you could leave it in, but also if you just want a plain raglan, you could take that one out. What I really love about this sweater is, I think, well, two things. The first one is there are quite a few free tutorial videos out in the world about the Flax. I'm pretty sure that Chronicles of Yarnia have just finished a video series on it. I think I can making that up, but I think they have. So when there are, yeah, and they also have a tutorial themselves, Tinka Knits, called How to Knit a Sweater. So I think that would be a really good one to follow. They also have really, really good schematics, so it will show you very clearly the yoke depth, the bicep width, the chest width, and I think that is very helpful when you're knitting for yourself, to, especially if you want to get into, if you want to pay a bit more attention to these things and you want to understand yoke depth and things a bit better, it's a good pattern for that. I don't think the Flax has short rows, which is good because it keeps it a very simple sweater, but I think it means the fit isn't quite as good, and that for me would be the major drawback in not knitting the Flax. But I'm saying this, I also don't know if maybe it has short rows, or maybe an update's been given with short rows and I've just missed it. This one has a whopping 26,000 projects on Ravelry, so you could definitely find, like, I think that's a really good way of looking at, you can look at lots of different body types, lots of different yarn types, different colours, different modifications, and be able to like scroll for some inspiration and understand what suits you. So I think this is probably my recommendation for the beginner project, as I think there's so much free resourcing out there that this would be great, but I don't have any intention of knitting the Flax anytime soon. Okay, two more. So the next one is the colouring book Raglan, and I hadn't heard about this one until it was recommended to me on Instagram. Now this is a pattern by Aimee Sher. I've seen some of Aimee's patterns before actually. I've never knit any of them. It is size inclusive. It goes from a 37 to a 67-inch bust. It is a worsted weight and it uses 18 stitches, 18 and a half stitches, very precise. It was inspired by a relaxed sweatshirt fit for my youth. And it comes with a few different options. There's 3/4 sleeves, there are stripes, there are long fitted sleeves. Apparently there are at least 14 possible permutations in the pattern itself, and more if you're willing to make some modifications. So that's quite exciting. It's nice that with one pattern you can get lots of different options. I love the stripes. I think if you've not done stripes before, this would be a really good like intro to stripes. And I think it looks great in lots of different options. I can see that there's even a schematic that shows you lots of different options, whether it's stripes or whether it's like a contrast neckband and things. It doesn't have quite as many finished objects. It has 179, so that's still a lot, but compared to the Flax, it's not quite as many. And I was really just impressed by this because to me, this is like just another raglan. Like, it doesn't stand out to me, but it got recommended quite a few times when I asked for people's favourite raglan sweaters. So obviously people have made it and they really love it, which I think is the biggest testament to whether a design is worth knitting. Then I've got one final pattern, and the final pattern is the, I think it's actually called the Tumble Tee. No, it's called the Tumble Tee. So this is a pattern by Lydia Morrow, and this was not recommended and I've not knit this one, but it stands out to me, and so I'm going to talk about it now, but it's not coming based on like my experience, so I'm just going to put that out there. This is a fingering weight sweater. It is 24 stitches per 10 centimeters, so fingering weight but not like super dense. And this goes from, it's definitely size inclusive. It goes from a 31, there's negative ease. So it goes from a, can't even see, 31 to a 63-inch bust. And like I said, this one has negative ease. So that means that the bust is actually going to, the knitting is going to stretch over the fullest part of your chest. And it's technically going to be smaller than your chest rather than like oversized and giving you more fabric there. And I think that's really interesting. The t-shirt is designed shorts, it's designed as a t-shirt, so it's short sleeved, but you could just modify the sleeves. And I think there are some versions in the pattern that have modified the sleeves quite a bit. It is cropped and it has, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, it's got a vintage fit. I think she called it a retro fit, a retro feel and a vintage fit. It's got two different options for neck facing. It also has two different waist shaping. It's got a lot of advice on how to pick a size that fits you, and it has bust darts. So if you need a bit more space in your fabric, a bust dart, we see darts a lot in sewn clothing that's not stretchy, so in like cottons and things that don't have space. You'll see them in like a dress shirt for a woman. There are darts sewn in either side, which are little wedges of fabric which shape the fabric. The fabric is flat, they fold over, and that makes a little like dome of fabric so that your boob can fit into that. And this does a similar thing, so it knits back and forward to make a little triangle, and that gives you a wedge of extra fabric so that you can fit a chest into that space and still have it fitting really well. I think this pattern would be really, really good if you want to get a bit more into tailoring knits to fit you better. Especially if you've knit some things before and you find they don't fit you so well. Now, I am not very busty, and so I pretty much never have an issue. Like, if anything, things come out a bit oversized and out of proportion for me. But if you find, for example, if a sweater recommends like 12 centimeters of ease and you're already quite busty, you might find that you feel really swamped in the finished garment, or it doesn't quite fit you the way you want it to look. And so I think this would be a really, really good alternative for that. I also want to add, so my other thing, this has just been updated, so I think the bust darts are new to the pattern, which is exciting. And the other thing I wanted to add is that I'm pretty sure Lydia has released what she's calling the Stumble dress, and that is the dress, the top part of the raglan with a skirt attached. So if that's something you're into, this could be really interesting. I might knit a dress one day. I have no intentions of doing it anytime soon. I'm too impatient. I have so much I want on my needles. But that is the reason I think it would be really good. Lydia's patterns are a little bit pricier. She's made it very clear that she wants to make a living wage out of her patterns, and I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But that's something to bear in mind. That being said, she does offer, like, if you can't afford, that there's a low income option. And actually, I say this, her Tumble Tee, I know she's just released a new sweater which is a bit more expensive. The Tumble Tee is only £10, so it's actually, I think it's not massively different in price to some of the other ones that I've already talked about today. So there we go, that is a rundown of all of my Raglan sweater recommendations. Of all of the ones I've talked about, I think the ones that I would knit would be, I'm definitely making another Semper sweater. I would like to make a White Mountain at some point, and having read about it now, I think the Tumble Tee could be interesting. I don't know how I want to knit it because of like being a knitter. I want to be able to knit the bust darts, and like I want to see how that goes, and I'm so interested. It always looks like it's such a good fit. I find that Raglans almost always have this little, on me anyway, this little like fold of fabric here, which I don't mind. I like it. I think it looks cool. I opt for that. But I think it'd be really interesting to knit one that is much more fitted, to see how it looks and to understand like fitting knitwear my body a bit better. So those are my three. Those are the three that I would knit: the Semper, the White Mountains, and the Tumble Tee. Now I've got one final bonus piece of information before I wrap up. Okay, so my final thing about Raglan sweaters is a bonus, and that is the percentage method. And the percentage method is a website or a method developed by Knitting Fool, and it is a website which will generate a Raglan sweater pattern for you based on your measurements, and it's all based on percentages. So I'll put a picture up of what that means, but what they ultimately have done is you take the 100%, so you take the amount that you want. So say I do have a chest measurement of 107 centimetres, and I usually like about 8 to 10 centimetres of ease. So say that I wanted my final Raglan to be 117 centimetres. That's a tricky number for the maths, but I'm not going to do the math, so that's fine. So my 100% would be the 117 centimetres, and then all the other areas are calculated based on percentages. So my collar would be 45% of that 100%. My front panel and my back panel would each be 40%. My sleeves would be 50%, and my ribbing at the bottom would be 90%. And so what it'll do is it'll give you all those numbers and it'll tell you how to get there. I've never done this before, but I used to go to knit night when I lived in London, and lovely Grace, who ran my knit night, had learned to knit when she was very young, and that's the only way she'd ever knit a Raglan sweater. Like, she just didn't follow patterns, she just did the percentage method. And I think that's the way that a lot of more like established knitters, like, I think that's what they do. And so I wanted to mention it. So if you're interested in designing or you're interested in knitting or understanding the bones maybe a bit more of a Raglan sweater, or you just don't want to buy a pattern, even though there are some free patterns here, you want to do something different, it might be worth checking the percentage method. I think a Raglan is a very straightforward design to do without a pattern. Like, you can get somewhere following more basic instructions, and it could be fun. So that's the percentage method. I think it also asks you to knit a gauge swatch and then enter your gauge. So it also would be a really good way if you're getting gauge, if you're knitting a sweater and you just cannot get gauge and you don't want to faff around with the sizes and things, you just want to plug your gauge in and get a sweater out, the percentage method might be a way to do it. So that's all for me. I hope you enjoyed this. It's a little bit different. I usually just talk about what I've been knitting. This is a bit more like a dive into my wardrobe, and also some patterns I will be knitting in the near future. I would love, if you have a favourite Raglan sweater and I've not mentioned it, feel free to put it down below. I feel like I get asked every time I talk about a different Raglan, I always get a message saying, I'd love to see a comparison video, like I want to know the differences. So I hope this satisfied that itch. But if you've got experience in any of these sweaters, especially the ones I've not knit, it'd be great to hear more about them. Are there any of these that you want to knit, either now or at some point in the future? Or are there any that you think are really, really great Raglan patterns that I have not even touched on, and you're sitting there thinking, what? I thought it would be the next one, and then you finished. Feel free to leave that down below. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope you have a really great weekend and happy knitting. See you next week. Bye.